1 through 4, let's read that. It says, "The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace be with us, from God the Father and from Jesus, Christ the Father, Son, in truth and love. I rejoice greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we're commanded by the Father." All right, first of all, we see here in this verse right here, it says, "The elder to the elect." So the elder is John. This is important because I want us to understand that, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, when John started getting older, John no longer preached, right? He would go to these churches, and witnesses say that he would go to the churches and he was so feeble that he would still be asked to come up to the front of the congregation, and John would issue these simple words. He would say, "Love one another, my little children." And that was it. And he would go and sit down. Now, I don't think he's quite there yet when he's writing these letters, but he's already old because he's referring to himself as the elder, and he's writing these letters because he wants to communicate that thing that is most important to him. Right? That's what happens. If you watch these old movies like used to be, especially in the Westerns, when they're like, bang, 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 and somebody gets shot and they fall off the horse and it takes 15 minutes to die and everything, and they're laying there on the ground and the posse rides up around them and stuff, and they're like, "Go on and get him," and everything. I never understood those movies because that definitely wouldn't be my last words, right? Like, let's stop what we're doing, get me to the dock, whatever. But you would say the most important thing to you, the closer you get to death's door, the more you're not going to waste your time with things that you feel are trivial. You're going to say the important stuff. And that's what John's doing. And it's important that we realize that he's writing this as the elder, as someone that's at the end stage of life, and he's relating this. Now, I'm not just going to glaze over something that has caused some differences of opinions. In 2 John, there's a divisive thing that occurs here in the introduction. 2 John says, "The elder to the elect lady and her children." And so I'm not just going to pass over that. I'll deal with it real quickly. The elect lady and her children, what is that referring to? There's two schools of thoughts there, and I'm okay with whichever camp you fall into because it is very, very clear. But one school of thought is that the elect lady and her children is symbolic. It's a symbolism for the church, and that the children are the people that are in the church, correct? It would be the only time in the New Testament that the church has ever been referred to in the feminine manner, if this is the case. Okay? Still doesn't say that that's not true because we have many Old Testament references, and I'm speaking fast because I know where I'm going, but there's many references in the Old Testament of where the nation of Israel referred to as in a feminine way, right? Like there was many times that was talked about that Israel was the betrothed bride of God and was spoke about in a feminine way. So to speak of the church in a feminine way wouldn't be completely absurd when you think that the church is the new Israel, right? So there could be symbolism there, and that's what John was going with that, and that this elect lady was the church and that her children were the members of that church, and John's writing this letter. Now, that makes sense, and as we go through the letter, especially the ending makes sense to think of this as a church. The second view is that this elect lady is actually, the word for it in Greek is Kyrios, right? Kyrios means Lord. Well, the only time, and I mean the only time, the singularly only time in Scripture that Kyrios is used as Kyria, which is the feminine gender of that, is right here. And what that literally translates as is Lord Lady. Now, I was sharing this with Mary this morning. I was like, and she was like, please don't say Lord Lady. But that is the literal translation of it, right? That it means Lord Lady. And it has this connotation that this would be a woman that's in a position of leadership. Okay? And that then he would be writing to this lady and her children. Now, what we can't do, and it never occurs, is we can't be symbolic about one thing and not the other. So, like if this is the lady that John's writing to, then the children would be her actual figurative children, not symbolic children. He wouldn't swap between symbolism in one area and be talking figuratively in another. If he's talking in symbolism, then the lady makes sense to be the church and the children make sense to be the believers in the church, or then it's a lady and her children. Now, not that it matters, because the content of the letter matters more, especially for today's sermon. I think, and I personally think, that when you read this letter, that there's not really any controversy here, because I don't think this is an established church. I think this is a house church. And I'll tell you why when we get to it. But I think this is a house church, and I think that this woman, whether she was widowed or whatever, she is the leader of this house church. And I think that her children make a major part of it, and that it's building up, and John truly loves her and truly loves the truth in her. And I think that the reason why 2 John is written and was not a part of 1 John, because remember 1 John was a letter that was written to all the churches in Asia Minor, and it was spread out. This is a letter that's specifically written, just like 3 John is, to an individual, and that individual, it is sent to that individual, and it is brief, whereas 1 John was long. Now I believe that for whatever reason, wherever this house church was started up, I believe that the woman's not named here, nor the church, if you believe that it is a church, was named here, is because it was in an area that was probably facing persecution, and they didn't want anything that could identify an individual or the church, the letter to fall into their hands, so that they could be persecuted. So I think that that's the reason why it is not addressed. But I wasn't going to gloss over that. If you want to believe that this is a church that stands outside of the churches of Asia Minor, there's lots to go on there. And if you want to believe that this is a house church, there's lots to go on there as well. Again, it's not super relevant, but it is something that pops up from time to time in people's conversations. And that's really all we can pull from it. Everything else is speculation. But he says here that he writes there, and he's very happy about the truth that he sees in her. So I told you how I feel. So from now on, I'll be talking about more like a house church. So I guess I need to say that. All right. So he tells how he feels about this particular woman, this house church. And he's very, very happy, but he writes this letter anyway, and it's going to reinforce a lot of ideas that we find in 1 John, because it's a summary of what he wrote to these other churches. He is challenging her in living in truth and love, and that anyone, her children, and anyone else there, that they should be doing the same thing. So 2 John 1, 5 through 13 says, "And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but the one we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. For many deceivers have gone out in the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such as one is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves, so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. And if anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting. For whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face, so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister greet you." So, walking in truth and love is what John commends to her. And the first part of that is that he acknowledges this command to love one another. We went over it in 1 John. We're going to go over it again in a small way. There's something that he says here, though, that's just a little bit, goes a little bit further than 1 John does in this. He says that they're to walk in love. This is a commandment to practice love. It's not a commandment to have good feelings or to wish well thoughts, to have the warm fuzzies about somebody. No, this is a practice of love in action, and that we're to walk in it. Paul says in Colossians 3:14, and above all these things put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. So he's challenging her that as they're continuing, and what I picture as a house church that's going to grow, that they need to be mindful, they need to remember that it's the practice of love that's going to make the change. You want to change things, it's going to be the practice of love that's going to change them. And he emphasizes this. And then he emphasizes the importance of doing this, but of walking in God's commands. He says back in the earlier verse, and this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. You ever, could be just me, and it's okay if it is. You ever been zooming along the interstate at about 85, 90 miles per hour, just keeping up with traffic in the fast lane, but keeping up with traffic and everything, and your wife says, how fast are you going? Right? Like you're passing a speed limit sign, and she's like, how fast are you going right now? Okay, and when she says that, and you pass that speed limit sign, you slow down a little bit to follow the law, or at least 10 miles within that, because state trooper's not going to pull you over within that 10-mile window and everything. Anybody relate to that? Right? Like when you see the speed limit run, I want you to know that there's a difference, okay? And I want you to, if you can follow that, then I want you to know there's a difference between the person that's like, okay, the speed limit on this road is 70 miles per hour, and they put their speed control on 70 miles per hour. That is obeying the law, the speed limit, right? That's obeying the speed limit. Whereas, if every time you speed the speed limit, or your wife reminds you, or you see a cop, you slow down into a varying degree, that's being aware of the speed limit. Okay? There's a difference between obeying the speed limit and being aware of the speed limit. Can you follow me on my thinking there? Okay, there's a difference of being aware of God's commands and obeying God's commands, walking in them. And a lot of times, for the most part, we're aware of God's commands. And every once in a while, something like our wife will speak up and we acknowledge them. But it's way different when we walk in them, when they're an intricate part of our lives. Psalms 119 says that when you do this, when we make God's commands, when we're abiding in God's word, when we make his commands a part of our lives, Psalms 19 shows that it guides our lives. 119:105 says, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. That's living and abiding in God's word. And just like it did in 1 John, John tells this house church a warning against deceivers. Now, there's another reason why I feel that this is a house church, because in this warning of deceivers, and I think this is what's going on, but it's an opinion, is that these false teachers that he's been dealing with at these churches in all of Asia Minor, he's written into them, and he's worried that these false teachers are going to go out and that there's a possibility that they may come to this house church and visit. And that's why he writes in, I think it was verse 10, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting, right? He's worried that they might come and bring this false teaching into this house church. And he's worried that they might be so convincing, as we talked about earlier, that they might be so convincing that it might be so close to the truth that this newly found infant church might be convinced by some of the things they say. And so he's like, listen, continue to abide in the word, continue to love, continue to follow the commandments, but to abide in the word, because this is how you're going to know the difference between what's false and what's true. Proverbs 19:20 gives us this advice. Listen to advice and accept instruction. And where does that instruction come from? The Bible, that you may gain wisdom in the future. So this is repetitive, right? This is very repetitive of what we talked about in 1 John. But the difference is that he's encouraging her to walk in this, to make this a part of life, to walk in truth and love. So, what does it look like to walk in truth and love? Last week, Anthony was up here and he did this diagram. And on this diagram, he drew this spiral. Do y'all remember this? And on this spiral, representing our path or our closeness to God, he asked a question. And in that question, he asked, do you know anybody that on this path would look like that they're pointed very closely to God? I don't know. There's lots of things, reasonings, but I heard my name called out, right? And I want you to know that humbled me. It could be that somebody was just messing with Anthony. It could be that because there was a pause, that no one knew what to say, and so my name was first thrown out there. It's cool. Doesn't matter either way, because I want to tell you why it's important. Because out of all the things that I desire in life from other people, I desire most for people to see Christ in me. It's very cool when somebody says, oh, Danny's an honest person, a hard-working person, a trustworthy person, a great friend, faithful, kind, loving. You can name any attributes you want. Those are great. And it's not that I don't appreciate that or work towards those things. But there's no greater thing that I strive for. There's no greater compliment than to be compared or in the same sentence with Christ. And when that happened last week, I didn't know Anthony was going to do that, didn't know anybody's response or anything, but when that happened, it humbled me and it shook me and it made me realize something that ties into this message this week. And so you're going to have to give me a moment, and I apologize. I think that most everybody here is aware. I don't know. And it's okay if you're not. Because I ain't got time and I'm not going to go into my testimony today. Okay? Not in depth. But there was a period in time where I was lost and I was bad, and I was not only a sinner, but I was evil. And during this time, I did some really bad things, and I wound up in prison. Now, up here in front of this pulpit, I share stories about my past all the time. High school, college, army. I don't normally like to talk about prison. It's not flattering, and also, a lot of times when I talk about it, I get nightmares. But I wasn't in prison, I wasn't in jail, I wasn't in county, I wasn't in state. I was actually in Leavenworth, and it's, by a lot of accounts, considered the most violent prison in all of American history. I'm sharing this with you for a specific reason, not so that you can know that I was in prison, nor why I got there or anything else like that. That's not the story for today. I share you about Leavenworth because I want you to understand this. There's a lot of bad things that happen at Leavenworth, and I survived a lot of bad things that happened at Leavenworth, and I caused a lot of bad things that happened at Leavenworth. But if you think for a minute that me mentioning that the worst thing about being in prison was the conditions, or that we didn't have air conditionings, that we were overcrowded, or that we didn't have good food, or that the violence or the fear or the assaults in other ways, or any of that was the worst thing about prison, you'd be wrong. The worst thing about prison is that life went on without you. That as you're sitting there because of your own choices, that people's lives go on without you. And you understand it up here, but you can never make peace with it here. Because the entire time you're there, you're thinking about the people on the outside all the time. The people on the outside have to get on with their lives, and they think about you from time to time. And it's hard. One of the greatest acts of kindness that anybody can do to someone that's in prison is to write a letter to them. In the time that I was in prison, I probably, got 30 or 40 letters the entire time I was in prison. And those 30 or 40 letters were from all kinds of different people. But I think that the people that wrote me on the outside thought that they were writing to me all the time. Right? But what really happens is that I would write a letter to somebody, and I spent a lot of time writing that letter thinking about them. It would get to them. They would read it once, maybe twice at most, and they would reply to that letter, and they go on about their life. I would read that letter hundreds of times. I would wear that paper out reading that letter just to have some connection to the outside. And every time somebody wrote me a letter, it was an act of love. Another thing that happened was around Christmas. We were allowed packages. And one year, I got a package. You could get a 20-pound package at Christmas. And they passed it out on Christmas Eve. And it really felt like Christmas, man. It felt like Christmas because you could get candy and cookies and stuff like that. And I had some friends that just one year, they didn't do it every year, just one year, that got together and they sent me a package. And it was full of candy and cookies and all kinds of good things, summer sausage and cheese, and it was great. That's been so long ago, and it still means something to me today. Those letters and packages mean so much to me. They were great acts of love. But I want to talk about two other acts of love. First, I share in my testimony all the time. My mom came and visited me one time. She did not understand the depths of the horrors that were in jail, in prison. And when she came and visited me, she had a more realistic glimpse of what that was like, and it broke her heart. And so she went back. Remember, I'm not saved. She went back and she started praying for me earnestly. And I want you to understand what I mean by earnestly. Have you ever been around somebody that prays for something so hard that other people are caught up in it? Because that's what happened to my mom. My mom was praying for me so much that other people in the church not only started praying with her. Now think about this at Reliance. Have you seen something like this before? Because I'd love to see something like this. Other people at her church started praying for me with her to the point that they asked permission for the church to open the doors on a special night, and they gathered on a weekly basis to come to the church and pray for me, and they did that for well over a year. That's an act of love. And because of that prayer, and I never share this in my testimony. You know why I never share this in testimony? Because our stories, I heard this once, it was Mary's coworker that said it, it's your story, tell it how you want to. I would never share this as part of my testimony because it's not something I'm proud of. I share many things that I think God wants me to share, and some things that I don't think are pertinent I don't share because I ain't proud of it. But during that time, because of that prayer, my mom's pastor, Brother Mike Lee, came to the church, to the jail. He drove 3 hours to Marianna to come to visitation. And they call me out to visitation, and I come out in the visitation, and I go to visit this man who I do not know. And when I walk in, I'm like, who are you? And he starts telling me that he's a pastor. So I think, because every once in a while in jails, they send these evangelists around and everything. I'm like, bud, you're barking up the wrong tree. All right, I'm going to go back. He's like, no, I'm your mom's pastor and everything. I said, that don't mean nothing to me, buddy. It means nothing to me. You made a mistake. He said, no, listen, I've been praying. I don't even think he told me at the time that they'd been praying, because I still didn't know my mom was gathering together with people and praying. He said, I've been praying for you, and I want to share something with you. I want you to know that no matter what you've done, where you've been, that Jesus forgives you. And I'm going to tell you something. I have now been a pastor for over 2 decades. And in that 2 decades time, I have had the privilege, I have had the honor of being a small little instrument in the transformation of people's lives. I have seen it on large levels, and I'm so thankful for all that God's used me in. I have gotten not only to witness to people, but to see people give their lives to Jesus, and it humbles me that I can be a small part of that God can use me. But in all the time that I've done it, in all the witnessing that I have done in my life, I have also been rejected, and rejected with doors shut in my face, rejected with ugly things said. But in all my time of being a Christian, I have never been rejected in such a harsh manner as Danny Lewis rejected Mike Lee that day. I cussed that man out. I cussed him out, and I threatened him physically if he did not get out of my face. And let me tell you something. When I turned that valve and I said that I'm going to hurt you, I meant it, and it was very clear that he understood that I meant it. And he left. I was a bad person. But if you fast forward a couple of months down the road, when I was on that concrete floor and I was crying out to Jesus, one of the voices that were in my head was Mike Lee's voice, telling me that all was forgiven. I want to tell you, and the reason I share this, it's not so that you can know a little bit more about me. I don't care nothing about that. I want you to understand something. Those letters and packages still resonate with me today. They were some of the greatest acts of love that have ever been given to me, and I will remember them for the rest of my life, and I will remember the people that sent me. But those things of God, those prayers and that witnessing, those are the things that changed my life. Those are the reason why Anthony can draw up on a board that anybody would ever think to utter Danny Lewis's name out loud. Not packages, not letters, things of God. So I know it's hard. I know it's hard when we're challenging you from the pulpit to go out and love other people and to share the truth with other people, because sometimes it's just easier, even when I'm convicted of that, it's just easier to mail it in. Sometimes it's easier to just go, you know what? I'm just going to give them a letter and a package. It's an act of love. It's a good act of love. It's something that they'll remember. But it's the things of God that change people's lives. And I know it can get hard. I know that when you start sharing Jesus, that people would draw back from you. I know that at times that there's rejection. I know that at times that some of your friend circles, they kind of lighten up and it starts getting harder, right? But let me tell you something, that no matter what the rejection is, no matter how crazy it seems sometimes to do the things that God's called us to do, that you may be laying the seed in somebody's life that later people will say that person reflects Christ. And you might not even know it. When we go out, we're called to practice love and truth. And it's the truth that changes people's lives. When we send letters and packages, what happens is that's great, but the people remember the person. I'll always remember those. And we do acts of love like that, they'll remember you. And they'll always think fondly of you and always think, man, that's a good person. I want to be more like that person. I might want to go to their church and be around other people like that. They'll remember you. When you share the truth, it changes lives. And they'll remember God. Today has been a challenging day, right? I challenge you in the beginning to examine your own hearts. I challenged you in the beginning about tithing. I challenge you today about sharing the truth in other people's lives and walking in love. But what it's truly about today is that we can do those things because God first loved us. And so it starts with remembering Him. It starts with our focus being on Him to accomplish the things that He's called us to do. And so this morning, that's exactly what we're about to transition into, is a time of remembering Him. So I'm going to ask Matthew to come up. I'm going to ask Anthony to come out, and he's going to pass out the communion. And during this time, we've already been praying, but I want you to be praying where you're at. If there's anything in your life that you want to give over to the Lord so that you're ready to partake in communion. If there's any sin that you want to just turn from right now, then this is your moment before we start. And as soon as these are passed out, I'm going to read scripture from 1 Corinthians 11. And as I read and we get to each one of the elements,